Hello, my friend. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about something that touches every single one of us, every single day. Something that can shake us awake in the middle of the night. Something that can ruin a beautiful afternoon. Something that can turn a pleasant conversation into a painful memory we replay for weeks. We're going to talk about anger, about hurt, about frustration, about all those feelings that rise up inside us, sometimes without warning, sometimes with such force that they seem to take over completely. And more importantly, we're going to talk about a truth that the ancient Stoics understood, a truth that can change your life even now, even after all these years you've lived. Your emotions are real. They are yours, but they are not you. Let me say that again, because it's the heart of everything we'll explore together today. Your emotions are yours. They belong to you. They arise in you, but they are not you. Now, I know what you might be thinking. What do you mean they're not me? When I'm angry, I feel angry through and through. When I'm hurt, the hurt is all I can feel. How can you say it's not me? And you're right to ask that question. It's a good question, an honest question. So let's sit with this together. Let's take our time. We have nowhere else to be right now. Let's really understand what this means and why it matters so much, especially now, in this stage of your life. Think back to a moment when you were truly angry. Maybe it was recent. Maybe it was years ago. Maybe it was something small, someone cutting you off in traffic, a thoughtless comment from a family member, a plan that fell through at the last minute. Or maybe it was something bigger, a betrayal, a loss, an injustice. In that moment, the anger felt total, didn't it? It felt like it was everywhere. In your chest, in your face, in your hands, your heart beat faster, your breath became shallow. The world seemed to narrow down to just that one thing, that one person, that one wrong. And in that moment, you might have said something you regretted, or done something you wished you could take back. Or maybe you just sat there, silent, but inside you were churning, rehearsing arguments, imagining confrontations, feeling that hot, tight sensation that anger brings. Now here's what I want you to notice. Where is that anger now? If it was you, if it was your very identity, your very essence, it would still be here, wouldn't it? But it's not. It came. It was intense. It felt all-consuming, and then, eventually, it faded. Maybe it took minutes, maybe hours, maybe days, but it faded. What does that tell us? It tells us that emotions are experiences that move through us. They are not permanent features of who we are. They are more like weather patterns than they are like the ground beneath our feet. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, understood this deeply. He wrote in his personal journal, what we now call the Meditations, about observing his own reactions, his own emotions, with a kind of gentle distance. He didn't deny them. He didn't pretend he was above feeling, but he practiced seeing them clearly, seeing them as separate from his essential self. He would remind himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Notice he doesn't say you have power over your emotions directly. He says you have power over your mind, over how you relate to what happens, including what happens inside you. This is the key insight we're exploring today. Let me share a simple metaphor that might help make this clearer. Imagine your mind is like a house, a home where you live. And emotions, anger, sadness, joy, fear, frustration, these emotions are like visitors who come to your door. Some visitors are pleasant. Joy arrives and you welcome her in gladly. Peace knocks and you open the door wide. Contentment settles in and you're grateful for the company. But other visitors are more difficult. Anger pounds on the door. Resentment slips in through a window you forgot to close. Hurt shows up uninvited and seems to fill every room. Now, here's the question. When anger arrives at your door, what do you do? Most of us, most of the time, we don't just let anger in. We mistake anger for the homeowner. We hand over the keys. We let anger redecorate the whole house. We let it speak for us, decide for us, act for us. We forget that we are the homeowner and anger is just a visitor. And here's the thing about visitors. They don't stay forever. They can't. Even the most persistent guest eventually leaves. But while they're there, we have a choice. We can let them take over completely, or we can acknowledge them, observe them, allow them to be present without giving them control. This is what it means to say that emotions are yours but not you. You are the awareness that notices anger. You are the space in which anger appears. You are the one who can say, I see anger has arrived. I feel it in my chest. I notice my thoughts speeding up. I recognize this feeling. That awareness, that ability to observe, that's you. That's the part of you that remains when the anger has passed. That's your true self. Now, let's be very clear about something important because I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying. I am not telling you to suppress your emotions. I am not telling you to pretend you don't feel what you feel. I am not suggesting that you become cold or detached or indifferent to life. That would be a terrible mistake. The Stoics didn't teach suppression. They taught observation. And there's a world of difference between the two. Suppression is when you feel anger and you push it down, deny it, tell yourself, I shouldn't feel this way, and try to force it out of your awareness. That's like taking your visitor, anger, and locking him in the basement. He doesn't leave. He just gets louder. He starts banging on the pipes. He finds ways to make his presence known, often in ways that are more disruptive than if you just acknowledged him in the first place. Suppressed emotions don't disappear. They go underground. They leak out in passive-aggressive comments, in tension headaches, in sleepless nights, in sudden outbursts over small things. Observation is completely different. Observation is when you feel anger and you say, there's anger. I feel it. It's here. Let me notice it. What does it feel like in my body? What thoughts is it bringing with it? What does it want me to do? You're not fighting it. You're not feeding it. You're simply watching it, the way you might watch clouds passing across the sky. You are the sky. The feelings are only weather. Remember that. You are the sky. The feelings are only weather. The sky doesn't fight the storm. The sky doesn't say, there shouldn't be clouds today. The sky simply remains vast and open while the weather moves through. This is the practice. This is what changes everything. Let me give you a concrete example, something that might feel very familiar. Imagine you're at a family gathering. Maybe it's a holiday dinner or a birthday celebration. You've prepared food, you've made an effort. You're looking forward to seeing your children and grandchildren. And then someone says something. Maybe your son makes a comment about how you never really understood him when he was growing up. Or your daughter-in-law mentions in front of everyone that she thinks you're too involved in how they're raising the kids. Or one of your grandchildren, absorbed in their phone, doesn't even look up when you try to talk to them. And immediately, you feel it. That flash of heat, that tightness in your throat, that voice in your head that says, "After everything I've done, this is the thanks I get." Anger has arrived. Or maybe it's hurt. Or maybe it's both, all tangled together. Now, you have a choice in this moment, and I want to walk you through what these two different paths look like. Path 1. You react. The anger speaks for you. You snap back with a sharp comment, or you withdraw, getting quiet and cold, letting everyone know through your silence that you're upset. Or maybe you keep it together during the gathering, but then you go home and replay the moment over and over, building a case in your mind, adding evidence, stoking the fire of your resentment. In this path, you've handed the house keys to anger. You've let it become you. When someone asks, "Are you okay?" you might say, "I'm angry. Not I feel angry, but I am angry." Do you see the difference? In one, anger is a temporary state. In the other, it's become your identity, at least for now. Path 2. You respond. You feel the anger arise. You don't deny it, you don't suppress it, but you observe it. You might even take a breath and silently acknowledge, "There's anger. I feel it. It's strong. It wants me to lash out. But I don't have to. I can let it be here without letting it control what I say or do." Maybe you take a moment before speaking. Maybe you excuse yourself briefly to step outside, to breathe, to let the intensity settle just a bit. And then, when you do speak, you speak from your deeper self, not from the anger. You might say something like, "That comment hurt my feelings. Can we talk about it later?" Or you might decide it's not worth addressing at all, and you let it pass, knowing that this feeling will fade, that it doesn't have to define the whole gathering. In this path, you've remained the homeowner. You've acknowledged the visitor without letting the visitor run your life. This is the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is what happens when you are the emotion. Responding is what happens when you have the emotion, but remain yourself. Now, I want to acknowledge something. This is not easy. If this were easy, we'd all be doing it naturally all the time, but it's not. It takes practice. It takes patience with yourself. And here's where I want to speak to you specifically about this stage of your life, because I think there's something beautiful that happens as we age, if we let it. When you're young, emotions often feel like emergencies. Every slight, every disappointment, every frustration feels enormous, immediate, urgent. The world is moving fast, and you feel like you have to react fast. But as you've lived more years, as you've been through more seasons, you start to notice patterns. You start to see that the thing that felt like the end of the world last month barely crosses your mind today. You start to recognize that you've survived every difficult moment you've ever faced, every heartbreak, every disappointment, every loss. This isn't cynicism. This is wisdom. You start to develop what we might call perspective. And perspective is one of the greatest gifts of aging. You know in your bones that feelings change. You know that what's intense today will soften tomorrow. You know that people who upset you today might make you laugh next week. You know that time really does shift things, That distance really does bring clarity. This knowing, this is your advantage. This is your strength. Young people often have to learn this the hard way through repeated painful experiences. But you already know it. Now the practice is simply to remember it in the moment, to access that wisdom when the emotion is fresh and strong. Marcus Aurelius was in his 50s and 60s when he wrote most of his meditations. He was writing as an older man, reflecting on what he'd learned, trying to remind himself of what he knew to be true when the pressures of the day threatened to overwhelm him. He wasn't writing as someone who had transcended emotions. He was writing as someone who was still dealing with anger, with frustration, with disappointment, but who had learned to see these things more clearly. He wrote, "How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it?" Think about that for a moment. The consequences of anger, the things we say that we can't take back, the relationships we damage, the peace we lose, the time we waste in bitterness and resentment. These consequences are almost always worse than whatever made us angry in the first place. The comment your daughter-in-law made, thoughtless as it might have been, didn't actually harm you. But if you let anger run the show, if you speak from that place of heat and hurt, you might cause real harm to your relationship with her, with your son, with your grandchildren. This is the cost of not observing your emotions, of not creating that small but crucial space between feeling and action. So how do we practice this? How do we actually develop this ability to observe emotions without becoming them? Let me offer you some very practical, very simple approaches. Nothing complicated, nothing that requires special equipment or years of training, just gentle practices you can start today. First, practice naming what you feel. This sounds almost too simple, but it's incredibly powerful. When you feel a strong emotion rising, pause and name it. Say to yourself, silently or even out loud if you're alone, "This is anger. I'm feeling angry right now." Or, "This is hurt. I feel hurt by what just happened." Or, "This is frustration. I'm frustrated because things aren't going the way I hoped." Why does this help? Because the moment you name the feeling, you've created a tiny bit of distance between you and it. You've stepped into the role of observer. You're no longer completely merged with the emotion. You're looking at it, identifying it, acknowledging it as something you're experiencing, but not something you are. It's like the difference between being caught in a rainstorm and watching a rainstorm through your window. Both are real experiences of the rain, but one has a bit more space, a bit more safety, a bit more perspective. Second, notice where you feel the emotion in your body. Emotions aren't just thoughts, they're physical sensations. Anger might show up as tension in your shoulders, heat in your face, tightness in your jaw. Hurt might feel like heaviness in your chest or a lump in your throat. Anxiety might create a flutter in your stomach. When you feel something strong, take a moment to scan your body. Where is this emotion living right now? What physical sensations am I noticing? This practice does something important. It grounds you in the present moment, and it reminds you that emotions are temporary physical states, not permanent truths about reality. The tension in your shoulders will release, the heat in your face will cool, the lump in your throat will dissolve. These are bodily processes, and like all bodily processes, they change. Third, remember a simple phrase: "This too shall pass." It's an old saying, and it's true for everything: joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain, anger and peace. When you're in the grip of a difficult emotion, remind yourself, This is intense right now, but it won't last forever. It's already beginning to change. And it is. Even as you notice it, it's shifting. Emotions are like waves. They rise, they crest, and they fall. Always, without exception. You don't have to make them pass. You don't have to push them away. You just have to wait and watch and let them move through their natural cycle. Fourth, practice the pause. This might be the most important practice of all. When you feel a strong emotion and you feel the urge to act, to speak, to send that text message, to make that phone call, to storm out of the room, pause. Just for a few seconds, just long enough to take 3 slow breaths. In that pause, you give yourself the chance to respond instead of react. You give your wiser self a chance to catch up with your emotional self. There's a beautiful saying, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. The pause is that space, and you can create it anytime, anywhere, just by deciding to wait, to breathe, to give yourself a moment. Now, let's talk about why this matters so much in your relationships, especially with family. As we age, our relationships with our children and grandchildren can become one of the greatest sources of both joy and pain. We've invested so much in these relationships. We've given so much. We care so deeply. And sometimes, that depth of caring makes us vulnerable. It makes us sensitive to slights, to perceived rejections, to moments when we feel unseen or unappreciated. Maybe your son doesn't call as often as you'd like. Maybe your daughter seems to take your help for granted. Maybe your grandchildren seem more interested in their screens than in spending time with you. And these things hurt. They really do. I'm not minimizing that pain, but here's where the practice of observing emotions becomes so valuable. When you can notice the hurt without becoming the hurt, when you can say, I'm feeling hurt because I wanted more connection and I'm not getting it, then you have options. You can communicate your feelings clearly and calmly. You can ask for what you need without blame or guilt. You can adjust your expectations. You can find other sources of connection and fulfillment. You can recognize that your children have their own complex lives, their own struggles, their own limitations, just as you do. But when you are the hurt, when you've merged completely with that feeling, then it's much harder to see clearly. Everything looks dark. Every interaction gets interpreted through the lens of that pain. You might withdraw or criticize or try to control, all in an attempt to stop feeling what you're feeling. And this, almost always, makes things worse. It creates the very distance you feared. The same is true with anger. When someone in your family does something that frustrates you, maybe they make a choice you think is foolish, or they ignore your advice, or they don't meet your standards for how things should be done, you might feel angry. And if you react from that anger, if you criticize harshly or speak sharply or bring up past grievances, you might get compliance in the moment, but you'll damage trust and warmth in the relationship. But if you can observe the anger, if you can notice, I'm feeling angry because I care about this person and I'm worried they're making a mistake, then you can choose how to respond more wisely. Maybe you share your concern once, calmly, and then let it go. Maybe you realize that they need to make their own mistakes and learn their own lessons, just as you did. Maybe you find a way to offer support without trying to control. This is the gift of emotional distance, not cold indifference, but wise perspective. Let me tell you about something that might resonate with you. As we get older, many of us notice that we're becoming more sensitive in some ways. Things that wouldn't have bothered us much in our 30s or 40s can feel more painful now. Maybe it's because we have more time to think. Maybe it's because we're more aware of time passing, of opportunities for connection that might be slipping away. Maybe it's because we're dealing with losses of health, of independence, of friends and loved ones, and those losses make us feel more vulnerable. This is normal, this is human, but it's also why this practice matters even more now. Because if we don't create some space between ourselves and our emotions, we can end up spending these years that could be peaceful, rich, full of small joys, caught up in old hurts, ongoing resentments, and unnecessary suffering. I've seen it happen. Maybe you have too. People who spend their later years bitter, angry, constantly rehearsing old grievances, pushing away the very people who could bring them comfort and connection. It doesn't have to be that way. You can choose differently. You can practice seeing your emotions clearly, acknowledging them fully, but not letting them run your life. You can be someone who feels deeply and lives wisely. There's another aspect of this that I want to touch on, and it has to do with the stories we tell ourselves about our emotions. When we feel something strongly, we often immediately create a narrative around it. We explain to ourselves why we feel this way, what it means, what it says about us or about others. For example, let's say you feel lonely. That's the basic emotion. Loneliness, a kind of ache for connection. But then the mind starts adding stories. I'm lonely because my children don't care about me. They're too busy with their own lives. I wasn't a good enough parent. Nobody values older people anymore. I'm going to end up alone. Do you see what happened? We started with a simple feeling, loneliness, and we built an entire story around it. A story full of judgments, predictions, and interpretations. And here's the thing. The story often hurts more than the original feeling. The simple experience of loneliness, if you just let yourself feel it without the story, is uncomfortable but manageable. It's a quiet ache, a wish for connection. It comes and goes. But the story of being unloved, unappreciated, abandoned, that story can torture you for hours, days, weeks. This is another place where observation helps tremendously. When you notice a strong emotion, try to separate the raw feeling from the story you're telling yourself about it. Ask yourself, what am I actually feeling in my body right now? What's the basic sensation? And then, what story am I telling myself about this feeling? Very often you'll discover that the feeling itself is simpler and less overwhelming than the story suggests. And sometimes, when you look closely at the story, you'll realize it's not actually true, or at least not as absolutely true as it felt in the moment. Maybe your children do care about you, even if they don't call as often as you'd like. Maybe you were a good parent, even if you made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Maybe you won't end up alone. Maybe there are other sources of connection you haven't explored yet. The stories we tell ourselves about our emotions are not facts. They're interpretations. And we can learn to hold them more lightly, to question them, to see them as one possible way of understanding the situation, not the only way. Marcus Aurelius had a practice that might be helpful here. He would often remind himself to see things as they truly are, stripped of his judgments and interpretations. He wrote something like this: "Today I escaped from anxiety," or no, "I discarded it because it was within me, in my own perceptions, not outside." This is a radical insight. Most of our suffering comes not from the external events themselves, but from our thoughts about those events, our interpretations, our stories. Your son forgot your birthday. That's the external event. The suffering comes from the story. He doesn't care about me. I don't matter to him. All those years I sacrificed for him, and this is what I get. But what if the story is incomplete? What if he's going through a difficult time at work and his mind is overwhelmed? What if he simply made a mistake, the kind of mistake any human makes? I'm not saying your hurt isn't valid. I'm not saying you shouldn't feel disappointed. Feel it, absolutely. That's honest. But notice the difference between "I feel disappointed that he forgot" and "he doesn't care about me." One is an emotion, the other is an interpretation, and possibly an incorrect one. When you can separate these, when you can feel the feeling without necessarily believing every story your mind creates about it, you free yourself from so much unnecessary pain. Let's talk about something else that's important. The difference between healthy expression of emotions and unhealthy dwelling on them. Some people misunderstand the Stoic approach. They think it means you should never express what you feel, that you should always keep everything bottled up inside, that you should be silent and stoic, with a small s, in the modern sense of emotionless and cold. That's not it at all. There's a time and a place for expressing your emotions. There's value in telling someone calmly and clearly, "What you said hurt my feelings." There's value in saying, "I'm feeling frustrated with this situation and I need to talk about it." Healthy expression of emotion is clear, direct, and aimed at connection or resolution. It comes from a place of self-awareness. You know what you feel, you know why, and you're choosing to share that in order to improve understanding or address a problem. Unhealthy dwelling is different. It's going over and over the same resentment, rehearsing the same arguments, telling the same story about how you've been wrong to anyone who will listen, feeding the emotion rather than releasing it. Healthy expression releases. Unhealthy dwelling entrenches. Healthy expression says, "I feel this way, and I'm telling you so we can understand each other better." Unhealthy dwelling says, "I feel this way, and I'm going to make sure you know how much you've hurt me, and I'm going to keep reminding both of us of it." One creates space for healing. The other keeps the wound open. So yes, express your emotions when it's appropriate. But do it consciously, with awareness, with the intention of moving toward resolution, not just venting your pain onto someone else. And most importantly, remember that expressing an emotion doesn't mean you have to act from it. You can say, "I feel angry about this," without speaking in an angry tone, without attacking, without doing any of the things that anger might urge you to do. You can acknowledge the feeling while still choosing your behavior. I want to offer you one more image, one more way of thinking about this. Imagine that you're sitting by a river. It's a beautiful day. You're comfortable on the bank, just watching the water flow by. And as you watch, you notice things floating in the river. A leaf, a stick, maybe a piece of trash, unfortunately, maybe a flower, all sorts of things carried along by the current. Your emotions are like those things floating by. They appear, they move through your field of vision, and they disappear downstream. You don't jump into the river and grab onto the stick and hold it tight and say, "I am this stick." That would be absurd. But that's what we do with emotions when we identify with them completely. We grab onto anger or hurt or fear and we say, "I am angry, I am hurt, I am afraid." Instead, you can stay on the bank. You can watch. You can notice, there goes anger, floating by. There goes hurt, there goes fear. And just like the stick in the river, if you don't grab onto it, it will pass. It will move downstream and disappear from view. This doesn't mean emotions don't matter. Of course they matter. They're information. They tell you about your needs, your values, your boundaries. But you are not the emotion. You are the awareness that observes the emotion. You are not the weather. You are the sky. You are not the traveler. You are the home that the traveler visits. You are not the river's debris. You are the person sitting peacefully on the bank, watching it all flow by. As we come toward the end of our time together today, I want to speak to you about the peace that this practice can bring. In your younger years, you might have been told that peace comes from having everything go your way, from avoiding conflict, from being understood and appreciated, from having your needs met by others. And there's some truth to that. External circumstances do matter. Of course they do. But as you've lived longer, you've probably discovered that you can't control external circumstances as much as you'd like. People are going to disappoint you sometimes. Things are not going to go according to plan. Loss is inevitable. Change is constant. So if your peace depends entirely on externals, you're setting yourself up for a lot of suffering. But if your peace comes from within, from your ability to remain centered even when emotions arise, even when circumstances are difficult, then nobody can take that from you. This is what the Stoics discovered. This is what Marcus Aurelius practiced even as he dealt with plague, war, betrayal, and the immense pressures of ruling an empire. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That strength, that inner stability, comes from knowing who you are, not your emotions, not your circumstances, but the awareness that witnesses it all. And here's the beautiful thing. You can access this at any moment, right now even. Even as you're listening to these words, you can notice there's awareness here. There's something in you that's simply present, simply watching, simply being. That's you. That's your true self. That's the part of you that remains constant even as everything else changes. Your body will continue to age. Your circumstances will continue to shift. People will come and go from your life. Emotions will rise and fall like waves. But this awareness, this witnessing presence, it's always here. It's always been here, and it will be here for as long as you live. Learning to rest in that awareness, to identify with that rather than with the passing emotions, is perhaps the deepest form of wisdom available to us as human beings. And the good news is, it's available to you right now. Not someday when you've meditated for 10,000 hours, not when you've read all the philosophy books, not when you've resolved all your problems. Right now, in this moment. So let me leave you with a simple practice, something you can return to whenever you feel overwhelmed by emotion. The next time you feel anger or hurt or frustration or any strong emotion, try this. Pause. Take a breath. Notice the feeling. Where is it in your body? What does it feel like? Name it simply. This is anger. This is hurt. This is fear. And then, very gently, remind yourself, this feeling is mine, but it is not me. I am the one who notices this feeling. I am the awareness, the space in which this feeling appears. Stay with that awareness for just a few breaths. You don't have to make the feeling go away. Just notice it from this place of gentle observation. And then, when you're ready, choose how you want to respond, not from the emotion itself, but from your deeper wisdom, your deeper self. This won't always be easy. Some days you'll forget. Some days the emotion will be so strong that it carries you away before you remember to observe. That's okay. That's human. That's part of the practice. Just keep coming back. Keep practicing. Keep reminding yourself of this truth. Your emotions are yours, but they are not you. Over time, you'll find that this creates a kind of spaciousness in your life. A breathing room, a sense of freedom that doesn't depend on controlling everything around you. You'll find that you can be with difficult emotions without being destroyed by them. You can feel deeply without losing yourself. You can care intensely without being overwhelmed. And perhaps most importantly, you'll find that you can be present with others, with your children, your grandchildren, your friends, with more openness, more patience, more love, because you're not constantly caught up in your own reactive patterns. This is the gift of this practice. This is the promise of this ancient wisdom. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for taking this time to sit with these ideas, to consider these practices. Remember, you are the sky, and your feelings are only weather. You are the home, and your emotions are only visitors. You are the awareness, and everything else, every thought, every feeling, every sensation appears within that awareness and then passes away. This is who you truly are. Not the anger, not the hurt, not the fear. You are the peaceful presence that remains when all of that has passed. Rest in that. Return to that. Trust that. And may you find in this practice a deep and lasting peace. Thank you, my friend. Until we speak again.